October 13, 1944. Somewhere in the scorched, hollowed-out gut of Aachen, Germany. Sound of a distant, low-frequency thud of heavy artillery, followed by the terrifying, rising whistle of an incoming shell. It slams into a building nearby with a bone-shaking roar of collapsing masonry. A rhythmic tat-tat-tat of a distant MG-42 stitches through the air, answered by the heavy thump of an American Browning. Then, a sudden, jarring silence that feels heavier than the noise. Listen to that. You hear it? Not the shells, not the screams. It's the silence that follows. That's the sound of Aachen. It's the sound of a city holding its breath, waiting for you to make one wrong move. We've been in this hellhole for days now. They told us it would be the first German city to fall, a symbolic victory. But symbols don't bleed. We do. Every street here is a jagged tooth and a broken skull. The air is thick, tasting of pulverized brick, sulfur, and the sweet, rotting stench of things left under the rubble too long. You can't wash it off. It gets into your pores. It gets into your dreams. Up ahead, the 1st Battalion is getting chewed up by 88s. But back here in the shadows of the ruins, the war is different. It's personal. It's a game of hide and seek where the loser doesn't get to go home. We're being hunted. Not by an army, but by ghosts. Nazi snipers. Men who have crawled into the vents and the attics, hiding behind the wallpaper of bombed-out nurseries, watching us through a crosshair. Every time I step over a pile of glass, I wonder if this is the moment. You feel a prickle on the back of your neck, a cold sweat that has nothing to do with the October wind. You start to look at a window, not as a window, but as a black eye watching you. A hole in a wall isn't just a hole, it's a barrel. We move like shadows, hugging the jagged remains of walls that used to be someone's home. You see a tricycle twisted in the debris, a charred piano, a child's shoe. And then you remember that the person who lived here is probably 5 feet under the bricks you're standing on. We were pinned down near an old streetcar, the metal groaning as it cooled in the evening air. The artillery had died down to a low, rhythmic thumping in the distance, like the heartbeat of a dying giant. I was with Miller. Poor damn Miller. He was 20, maybe 21. He had this look in his eyes, the 1,000-yard stare, but he was trying to hide it. His hands were shaking so bad he could barely hold his rifle. "Hey," he whispered. His voice was cracked, barely audible over the wind whistling through the skeletons of the buildings. "You got a light?" I crawled closer to him, our shoulders bumping. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a crumpled pack of Luckies. I handed him one. I shouldn't have. We knew the rules. You don't show a light. You don't give them a target. But when you've been living in the mud and the blood for weeks, a cigarette is the only thing that reminds you you're still a man. Miller fumbled with a match. I leaned in, shielding the flame with my helmet, trying to create a tiny sanctuary of warmth in that gray, freezing wasteland. The match flared, a small, defiant spark. In that second, I saw Miller's face. He looked like a ghost already, pale, caked in white masonry dust, his eyes sunken into his skull. He took a drag, and for a fleeting moment, His shoulders dropped. He looked peaceful. Crack. It wasn't a loud sound, not compared to the 105s. It was just a sharp, dry snap, like a twig breaking in the woods. Miller didn't even flinch. He just stopped. The cigarette stayed pinned between his lips for a second, a thin trail of blue smoke rising into the air. Then his head lolled back against the rusted metal of the streetcar. There was a neat, red hole right above his left eye. No scream, no dramatic last words, just the sudden, violent exit of a soul. I sat there, frozen. The match burned down to my fingers, stinging the skin, but I couldn't move. I watched the light go out of his eyes, just like that. 1 second, he was thinking about the girl back in Ohio. The next, he was just another piece of the wreckage. He didn't even get to finish his smoke. I pressed my face into the dirt, the smell of oil and wet earth filling my nose. I wanted to scream, to fire my Garand until the barrel melted, to kill every shadow in this godforsaken city. But I didn't. I couldn't. If I moved, I was next. The sniper was still out there. Somewhere in that sea of broken stone, he was resetting his bolt, calm as a priest, waiting for the next spark, the next movement, the next boy to forget where he was. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was heavier. It was the silence of a tomb. Aachen isn't a city anymore. It's a machine designed to turn young men into memories. We aren't soldiers anymore. We're just prey. And the hunter is patient. He has all the time in the world, and all I have is the next step. One step. Pray it's on solid ground. Pray the ghost is looking the other way. October 13. God, I hope I don't see the 14th. Sound of a muffled, heavy thump of a satchel charge exploding inside a building. The screech of rebar tearing and the roar of a floor collapsing. Dust hisses like steam. Then the frantic shk-shk of a soldier racking a bolt, followed by the heavy, ragged breathing of men trapped in a confined space. The streets are a death trap. We've learned that the hard way. If you show so much as a shadow on the pavement, the ghost in the ruins will punch your ticket. So, we stopped using the streets. We're mouse-holing now, blowing holes through the interior walls of these shattered houses with TNT, moving room to room, floor to floor. We're living like rats in the plaster and the lath, moving through the skeletal remains of people's lives. One room, you're stepping over a charred dining table where a family once ate. The next, you're crawling through a nursery where a headless porcelain doll stares at you from the debris. It's a claustrophobic hell. Every doorway is a potential ambush. Every pile of rubble could be hiding a German with a Luger or a serrated knife. But I'm not looking for just any German. I'm looking for him, the one who took Miller. I can still see that small red hole in Miller's temple every time I close my eyes. It wasn't just a kill. It was a professional's work. This guy is good. He's patient. He's cold. And I can feel him out there, somewhere across the square, watching the same jagged gaps in the masonry that I am. It's a game of chess, but the pieces are made of flesh, and the board is soaked in oil and blood. The air in here is stagnant, thick with the smell of old wallpaper, lime dust, and the metallic tang of cordite. My lungs burn. My eyes are raw from the grit. I haven't slept in 36 hours, but the adrenaline is keeping me wired, humming through my veins like a live wire. "Stay low," I whisper to Sergeant Barnes. He just nods, his face a mask of gray soot. He's seen too much of this. We've all seen too much. I find a position behind a fallen radiator in what used to be a third-story apartment. The roof is gone, opening up to that miserable, leaden sky. I take my helmet off, slowly, gingerly, and place it on the end of my bayonet. I poke it just an inch past the edge of the window frame. Ping! The helmet jerks back, a clean hole punched through the steel. The sound of the shot reaches us a split second later. He's close, maybe 200 yards. He's in the department store ruins, second floor, behind the remains of a marble pillar. Now I have him. I don't fire, not yet. If I miss, he disappears back into the labyrinth of the city, and the hunt starts all over again. I wait. My finger rests on the trigger of my Springfield, light as a feather. I have to be a ghost too. I have to stop breathing. I have to become part of the wreckage. Minutes turn into hours. My legs are cramping, and a bead of sweat stings my eye, but I don't blink. Through the scope, the world is a narrow, blurry circle of gray. I see a flicker, just a tiny movement behind the pillar, a glint of glass, the sun, for a fleeting second, breaking through the clouds and catching his lens. In that moment, I don't feel like a hero. I don't feel like I'm defending democracy or the American way. I feel like a butcher. I feel the weight of every man we've lost in this godforsaken city pressing down on my trigger finger. I think about Miller's unlit cigarette. I think about the thousands of letters that will never be read. I see him now, a patch of Feldgrau wool, the edge of a jawline. He's adjusting his position, confident that his prey is still pinned down behind that radiator. He's young. Even through the crosshairs, I can tell he's just a boy, maybe no older than Miller was. The world narrows down to a single point. My heartbeat slows. Thump, thump, thump. I exhale, letting the breath leave my body in a long, silent stream. The crosshairs settle. This is the sheer brutality, the kind they don't tell you about in the newsreels. It's not about glory. It's about who can be more of a monster. Crack. The recoil kicks into my shoulder, a familiar, violent jolt. Through the scope, I see the figure behind the pillar crumple. No scream, no struggle. He just slides down into the dust, disappearing into the shadows of the department store. "Got him," Barnes mutters. I should feel a sense of triumph. I should feel like justice has been served. But all I feel is an immense, crushing emptiness. I just killed a man who was doing exactly what I was doing, trying to survive in a world that had gone mad. I lean back against the wall, my rifle heavy in my lap. The dust settles around us again. The silence returns, that suffocating Aachen silence. We won this round, but the city doesn't care. The ruins don't applaud. Another boy is dead, and the shadows are already moving in to take his place. We're not winning a war here. We're just losing ourselves, one room at a time. Barnes taps my shoulder. "Move out. We got 3 more blocks to clear before dark." I stand up. my joints popping like pistol shots. I look at the hole in my helmet, then at the ruins across the way. I wonder how many more of us have to become ghosts before this is over. I wonder if, when the smoke finally clears, there will be anything left of the men we used to be. October 14. The sun is going down, and the city is getting hungry again. October 21, 1944. Aachen has finally stopped screaming. The white flags are bleeding out from the shattered balconies and the jagged remains of apartment windows. They aren't flags of peace, they are flags of exhaustion. The city didn't just surrender, it collapsed under the weight of its own bones. After weeks of the grinding, hellish music of artillery and the sharp, sudden punctuation of sniper fire, the silence that has descended is terrifying. It's a thick, suffocating blanket that smells of wet lime, scorched wool, and the sweet, sickly rot that comes from things buried too deep beneath the brick. I find myself walking. My boots feel like they're made of the same heavy lead as the shells we've been throwing at this place. Every step over the crunching glass and pulverized masonry feels like a betrayal of the dead. You can't walk through Aachen without stepping on someone's life. Here, a charred piano. There, a child's shoe, perfectly preserved, while the house it belonged to is now just a pile of gray dust. I'm moving back toward that department store, the place where the ghost lived, the place where I became a ghost myself. I didn't have to go back. My sergeant told us to rest, to find the cellar that wasn't flooded and close our eyes. But sleep is a luxury for men who still have a soul. Mine felt like it had been scraped hollow by the grit and the smoke. I needed to see him. I needed to see the face of the man who had been the shadow in my nightmares, the one who turned Miller into a memory in the blink of an eye. I climbed through the skeletal remains of the ground floor. The air inside was stagnant, trapped for years it seemed, until we blew the doors off. I climbed the stairs, my breath coming in ragged hitches. My Springfield felt like 1,000-pound weight in my hands. I didn't need it anymore, but I couldn't let it go. It was the only thing that felt real. I found him behind that marble pillar on the second floor. He hadn't moved. The dust had already begun to settle on his uniform, turning the German gray into the same uniform color as the ruins. He looked like he was part of the architecture, a statue carved from the misery of the fatherland. I knelt down beside him. My knees hit the grit with a dull thud. Up close, the Nazi monster, the invisible devil, the ghost of Aachen. He was just a kid. He couldn't have been more than 17. His face was thin, his cheekbones sharp under skin that was translucent and pale. He looked like he'd been starving for weeks. His hands, the hands that had operated that bolt with such lethal, clinical precision, were small, dirty. There was a ring on his finger, a simple band of cheap metal. I reached into his tunic. My fingers were shaking so hard I could barely grip the fabric. I pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. Inside, there was a photograph and a letter. The woman in the photo had the same sharp cheekbones, the same hollow eyes. She was standing in a garden that was probably gone now, holding a basket of apples. On the back, in elegant, slanted handwriting, were words I couldn't read, but I didn't need a translator. I knew the language of loss. It's the same in Ohio as it is in Berlin. It said, "Stay safe." It said the winter is coming, and the house is cold without you. It said, "We are waiting." I sat there on the floor next to him, the man I had spent days hunting, the man who had killed my friend, and I felt a sob catch in my throat that I couldn't let out. Because if I started crying for him, I'd have to cry for Miller. I'd have to cry for all of them, for the boys who were promised glory and given a grave in a department store, for the mothers who would receive a telegram and a folded flag instead of a son. This is the raw brutality, the true unvarnished horror of it all. It's not the fire, it's not the explosion, it's the realization that we are all just pawns in a game played by men who don't have to smell the rot. I looked at my own hands, caked in the black soot of Aachen. I realized that the boy lying next to me and I were the same. We were both just children of the 20th century, taught to kill before we were taught how to live. We were both ghosts. One was just lucky enough to still be breathing. The war is moving on. The maps in the high command offices will have a new line drawn on them tonight. The newspapers back home will scream about the fall of Aachen and the heroic advance. But they won't talk about the silence. They won't talk about the way the wind whistles through the ribs of the cathedrals like a funeral dirge. They won't mention the smell of a city that has been turned into a tomb. I put the photograph back in his cold hand. I folded his fingers over it. It was a pathetic gesture, a drop of water in an ocean of blood, but it was all I had. I stood up, my joints popping like pistol shots in the quiet room. I looked out the window, past the pillar, toward the square where the white flags were fluttering. I saw my squad down there. Barnes was sitting on a crate, his head in his hands. He looked 80 years old. We were supposed to be the victors. We were the liberators. But there was no joy. There was no singing. There was just a hollow, aching emptiness that I knew would follow us all the way to Berlin and beyond. You don't ever truly win a war like this. You just survive it. And the cost of that survival is a piece of yourself that you leave behind in every street corner, every basement, and every heart you stop. I walked back down the stairs, leaving the boy and his mother's photo in the shadows. As I stepped out into the gray light of the afternoon, a cold rain began to fall. It didn't wash the city clean. It just turned the ash into mud. I thought about the people who will come back to this city in 10, 20, 50 years. They'll build new houses. They'll pave over the craters. They'll put glass back in the windows. But they'll never get the sound of the silence out of the stones. They'll never know that under their feet there's a layer of our youth ground into the dirt. We are the ghosts of Aachen. Some of us are buried, some of us are walking, but none of us are going home. Not really. Because the boys who left for war died here, just as surely as the ones who took a bullet. What's left is just a shell, a uniform filled with memories and the taste of smoke. October 21. The battle is over. The silence has won. And I've never been more afraid of the quiet in my entire life. I look at the sky, waiting for a sound, any sound, to break this peace. But there's nothing, just the wind, just the rain, just the weight of the things we've done, settling into the earth like a permanent frost. God forgive us. God forgive all of us for what we turned this world into.